It's great to be here. And I think of you, I think of Jesus when he said, watch and pray. We all have. That's why we're here. That aside, having survived Grace Academy and drunk deep from the well house of ancient lore and the heroes and heroines therein, you are now ready to begin the heroic quest of your own. What will you do? Because doing or deeds is what will make up the rest of your life. And what you do in life echoes in eternity. The question to be answered is, will your echoing be heroic? As you recall from both your ancient literature classes and your medieval history classes, a traditional heroic life begins with a quest, perhaps for wealth or fame, or vow of revenge against an enemy, personal, familial, or community. The hero or heroine is the one who strove to do and did the impossible. They, whether man or woman, shoulder the burden that in many cases became a cross they carried even unto their death. This is what makes them a legend and worthy to be emulated. They did the hard thing. Now that you've done your hard things in the classroom, you too have an opportunity to do the hard thing on your quest for what will, Lord willing, be a heroic life. What will you do? What will you leave behind in terms of your saga or epic tale? You're now at the crossroad point in your life. You're sick and tired of routine and being forced to do things that you really don't want to do on a daily basis. If I could only get out of school, I would. What? What would you do? You are out of school. Again, the crossroads. Everybody wants to be somewhere else, but are they willing to take the first step for being someone different? Or will they settle for the ordinary, be like everyone else? Up to this point in time, you've been listening to both your teachers and your parents tell you what to do, what's a good idea to do, and what you should not do. Now, however, you must become focused on what you want and what you will do that will lead you to the heroic life. Notice that I say the heroic life. No Plato's Republic here, no noble life wherein you'll be somehow placed into a certain occupation because of some element that you're supposedly descended from. You are the one who must decide. Even if you are going to class next year like a good boy or a good girl, if you do not have a long-term goal in mind, you'll be just as aimless as you felt on those days at Grace Academy when you wanted out of the classroom and you didn't really know why or have anything to do. So now we come to it. What would you do? What could you do? What should you do for the rest of your life? Understand, you'll not have the answer to that question now, nor do I expect you to do so. But by a willingness to prayerfully and carefully ask that question regularly to yourself, you'll be able to cut through a lot of time-wasting and perhaps even soul-wasting activity. If nothing else, you'll know what you should not be doing, and that's half the battle. So there are three questions I'd like you to consider this evening, and for the next decade or so. One, your capacities. You must evaluate your capacities accurately and on a regular basis. What are you actually capable of doing? Two, what's the most important job you can do? Three, what's the most important job you can do in which few people can replace you? A young man or woman who has even a vague idea of the answers to these three surveys has a good grasp of what they ought to do with their life. In other words, what they're calling before God should be. It's not an easy task, but it is vital. Jesus in Luke 14:28 calls us to count the cost before you set about to build the tower, whether you have sufficient to finish it. I think this is a good idea, lest your tower building end up like Babel and come crashing down upon you. And the sooner you set about trying to figure out those three things, the sooner you can have an idea of what God has called you to do. And by calling, I don't mean a job, but rather a task, a vocation, where you can minister best by reflecting Christ clearly and making changes that echo in history a century or two later because you did the hard thing by doing the heroic thing now. because you did the hard thing by doing the heroic thing now. In other words, you need to take over your lesson planning and testing time now. Your teachers are out of the picture. No Renweb here. So let's get to it. What kinds of work appeal to you? What kinds of work do you do best? I don't know, I just graduated. Well, get out there and find out. That's what summer vacation is for. Not lying on a couch looking at your phone. Playing that Snapchat thing. Is your phone on? Don't make me come down there. Now think back to your ancient classes, your studies in Aristotle. In order for you to move from potential to actual, you have to do just that. You have to move. You have to do something. In other words, it's similar to the Socratic discussions in the classroom, which Isaac always tried to take over. You have to be willing to ask yourself the hard questions and answer them, and then act on those answers. What hard thing would you be willing to do now that you are young and don't have the burden of family or house payment? What will you risk? What will you do? What job will you take? The one that pays the most money. Okay, money's important. But that's not very heroic, is it? Salary levels are only one way of making that decision. And having lots of money only goes so far if you're not happy or fulfilled as it being created in God's image, who, Lord willing, is searching for their calling before God. So perhaps we should ask the most important questions. 40 years from now, if you look back at your life, what will you see? When you're my age, what will you see? Not in a mirror. But your life, was it God-honoring? Did you leave behind changed lives for Christ? Did you innovate something in the educational, medical, technical, or legal field? Did you leave behind a fortune that you stewarded to help those in need or finance mission fields, hospitals, or start Christian schools? Did you seek to fulfill some dream you always had of doing that few people have done before? Or did you play it safe and do nothing but make excuses? And the most brutal question of all, what will your story be that you will leave behind? Did it matter that you lived? In other words, meaning and purpose. If your job could be filled easily by another man or woman at the same wage, you would not distinguish yourself above the norm. You're a wage slave. Wage slaves do not live heroic lives either for themselves or Jesus Christ. They are just marking time as they pass through time. They're wasting time. Remember, after the keeping of your soul, time is the most precious commodity you have. Why? Because once you lose time, you never get it back. You can lose money and get that back, but you can never get time back. So again, what's the most important thing you can do for God in which few people can replace you? You need to ask that question now while you still have time. You need to work hard now while you still have time. You won't be young forever. Consider the following statement by a man who had no more time. And I quote, "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you're going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You're already naked. There's no reason not to follow your heart. No one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die to get there. And yet death is the destination we all share. No one has ever escaped it. That's how it should be, because death is life's change agent." End quote. Steve Jobs. Apple computer, iPhone, that's Steve Jobs. Perhaps this is why the writer of Ecclesiastes 12:1 wrote, "Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, which you'll say, 'Take no pleasure.'" Lamentations 3:27 tells us, "It's good for a man that he bear the burden in his youth." And young ladies also. Jesus himself said, "For the kingdom of heaven is as a Lord traveling into a far country, who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. And unto one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1. To every man and woman according to his or her several abilities, and straightway took his journey." It's the best argument against socialism ever. Will the Lord return and ask questions of his servants? Will he ask you questions? You've been born into one of the freest, most prosperous countries known to man. You're also Texans. Yeah. You've been given a Christian classical education. Was it merely just a better reading list with Jesus sprinkled on top? Or did it mean something to you? Only you can decide. To help you do so, let's end with story time. We'll talk about the Leviathan of the sea, the great shadow that covered the earth, the beast with 1,000,000 eyes and 1,000,000 ears, conquest, plunder, piracy, kidnapping, opium wars with China, international slave trade. Right now the parents are thinking, you want our kids to be mercenaries and pirates? No. Actually want them to oppose such people now, as one man and his companions did, both men and women, centuries ago. Understand, this beast with 1,000,000 eyes was founded in 1600 by Queen Elizabeth I to further international trade for England. Speaking of the British East India Company 200 years ago, it eventually had an army of 250,000 men, over twice the size of the standing British army, had its own navy, flew its own flag. International trading conglomerate that could rival the combined forces of Amazon, Facebook, and Google put together. It become the beast. The man, we all know him because he did famous things. He changed history forever. There are movies made about him, books written about him. What few do know is that William Wilberforce faced down the Leviathan of the sea, the British East India Company, for 40 years. He survived threats to his life, malicious lies, being mugged, strange and inexplicable accidents. He wrecked his health. His family suffered tremendous stress. But by God's grace, put an end to the British Empire's international slave trade forever. And for the ladies, there's Amy Carmichael, 55 years without furlough in India. And then the Green Beret of all missionaries in the garden spot of India, Calcutta, 69 years, Mother Teresa. I'm not asking much. Except this. What will you do with your talents and abilities? Jed, Stephen. What will you do to live the heroic life? Ethan. What will your deeds be, Hayden? What will you do that makes you, Jacob? What burden will you take up, Abby? What will you risk, Sarah and Sydney? And what price will you pay, Isaac? Ask those questions now while you have time. In other words, do the hard things when you're young so you don't have regrets about having done nothing. For after a long time the Lord of these servants cometh, and reckoneth with his servants, asking them to give an account of their thoughts and deeds, and whether they were heroic and faithful or not. The ultimate Socratic discussion, the true senior thesis and final exam. Do not disappoint him or me. For what we do in life echoes in eternity. Isn't that true? It's true, isn't it? Thank you.